Hey Hannah, how are you doing?
Very good, thanks.
It's great to have you on the podcast because we've been obviously speaking for a while. And HYBR is a startup that I've known about for a while, given that we went to the same university. We never actually met until sort of a few weeks ago. But yeah, I think this episode will be a very good episode because you've got a lot of sort of key teachings that you've done, especially during the beginning of starting HYBR.
Yeah, no, it's been a real journey, and yeah, I'm excited to speak to you. Thanks for having me.
No, great. That's my pleasure. So I think like it would be amazing to just jump in straight away with, I guess, like introducing HYBR. So what is HYBR?
HYBR is a student accommodation platform that supports first-time renters. The idea came about when I was a student at university, and I was shocked by the countless students every year that go through the same ordeal and absolutely hate renting. I've never spoken about HYBR without someone telling me a horror story about how they got taken advantage of and how they just didn't know what they were doing and got kind of exploited. So I kind of thought, why isn't there a platform that just looks after the students' interests, helps them understand background checks, contracts, the obligations during the tenancy, and is just there for support throughout the year. So that's what we're doing at HYBR.
Yeah, I mean for reference, like the student sort of accommodation landscape in Bristol, which is obviously where you must have experienced the problem, is pretty rubbish. Like it's awful. So we probably don't have time to like talk about all the atrocities in one sort of podcast, but it is pretty bad. So I can see why you got the idea because it is pretty bad. But I
Yeah.
guess like how did you kind of like obviously you saw the problem there that sort of students might be being a bit exploited. You know, the fees are crazy high. People don't understand the sort of legal stuff behind it. All of this sort of stuff. Like horror story number one, my mate had like he bought obviously he got his tenancy, moved in, and he didn't have a kitchen. They just removed the kitchen, so he didn't have a
Oh
kitchen
my
for ages. Yeah,
God.
and he couldn't do anything because there was a bit of small print in the contract, or whatever. So it's just like okay, cool. So yeah, it's pretty bad. But how did you kind of see that problem, and how did you start HYBR? I guess at the beginning when it was just an idea.
Well, so all of our competitors, like the traditional letting agents or accommodation portals, are built for the landlord or agents. So you want to turn that whole premise on its head and build a product for the student. Letting agents are paid by landlords to protect their interest. Hence, it's often like a letting agent and their legal team versus a student. So we want to create a platform, or we are creating a platform that's tailored to the student. And by doing so, this also helps the landlord because a happy student is a happy landlord, less headaches for them throughout the year. But to begin with, so I graduated from university in July 2019 and then spent that summer kind of thinking through the problem with my housemate and putting together a business plan and then built a very base. Actually, I didn't. I went out and started pitching to landlords. So I knew I had the student story. Like I understood the student pain points. Used to stand outside the library, getting insights from different students, handing out snacks, make them talk to me, and heard lots of stories like the one about your friend in the kitchen.
That's probably
Um,
how I saw you. That you just
yeah,
like hang around the libraries.
probably. Um, and then yeah, so then I started calling up landlords I had rented through or my friends' landlords to figure out what their issues were in the current market and then what they thought about HYBR, kind of adapting the model as I spoke to different landlords. And then pitched to a landlord, got his kind of properties, quickly rushed home to make a Squarespace website so I could advertise those properties. And then it kind of went from there.
That's crazy. So you basically got the phone numbers of the landlords from your friends, obviously from like their contracts or like they must have had their
Yeah.
phone numbers. Called up a few. What did you say?
So I just kind of said, how do you advertise to students? What are your kind of biggest issues? Get them kind of speed talking. Say that we wanted to be this platform that would find you tenants way faster than other competitors and way better tenants. Because if we support student tenants, if we help them understand what they're getting themselves into and make them feel like we're on their side, it will just mean a much better relationship for you. So we kind of really played up the support piece and also understanding the student mindset, understanding how to infiltrate student markets with like campaigns, ambassadors, social media. I mean, you'd say to a landlord that, you're really good on Instagram and they think, wow, you really must know what you're talking about. So yeah, then getting our first landlords on board and they really just shared the same vision of wanting to improve the student accommodation market for the better, and just went from there.
Mm. But I guess like that's quite a big step in the business because it's obviously you. you took the landlords away from the sort of traditional letting agents and like the already existing infrastructure, and you kind of sold them that dream. You didn't have anything to show them, but
Yeah.
you like they came to you. So I guess like how did you kind of earn their trust at the beginning when like you didn't really have anything to stand by?
It just playing up on the pain points, just like the fact that they, as a landlord, they'd either go to a letting agent, have to hand over a large part of their kind of commission of their rent, but the letting agent does everything for them, or they have to use open rent and like other platforms like that, but they'd have to do a bulk of the work themselves, pay very little but have to do a lot themselves still. So we were sitting in the middle. We were saying you get the kind of experience you get from a letting agent, really personalized, but you can pick and choose different services for a fraction of the cost. So it was
Mm,
just talking to them about their issues and then just saying, okay, right, that we'll build that in our platform. We'll make sure that you're catered for, and just yeah, just having a close relationship with both sides so that you can kind of
mm,
keep on molding your product to suit their needs.
mm. That's really interesting that you went for the sort of like landlords first, because obviously when it comes to these sort of like two-sided platforms, like what's always kind of recommended is you get the side on that's kind of like there's more value for the other side if you get them on. So like for landlords, obviously there's more value for the students to like, because for the landlords, for instance, they could have their property on like multiple different platforms, right? There's
Yeah,
like there's like very little cost for them.
yeah,
So the likelihood of them saying yes is fairly high. So yeah, what was the next step? You set up that Squarespace website, and then what?
yeah. And then our number one kind of channel that was directed from our website, and that's still our number one channel, is Facebook. Using Facebook groups, again, really good way to get customer feedback as well, figure out where students struggle, what they need help with, and just engaging with like student communities, offering different properties, finding out what students want, offering free consultation. Like, okay, you want this property here in this location, and then you call up landlords. Okay, I've got a really
Hmm.
great group of students. They want a property here, and then connect the two. That's kind of how it started.
What was the sort of like, I guess, key offering from you guys? Because it sound like, especially at the beginning, it was like for the landlords, it was very much sort of like we can offer everything that the letting agent does at a fraction of the price. So it was at the beginning, was it majority sort of competing on price?
Yes, competing on price and the service. Like a lot of landlords were getting really fed up with their letting agents. There
Mm,
was just a real feeling that letting agents were outdated. They weren't very good at customer service. A lot of landlords were quite shocked to see these horrible reviews online about their properties. And they were like, I don't want students to have a really bad experience in my 5 bed property. Like, I don't want that to be all over the internet. So we were just kind of
mm.
playing on the annoyance that was already there.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, because you think like these letting agents are really awful for the students, but you always think like they must be amazing for the landlords. I don't know, because that's just in my mind. That's just how it might work. But because obviously students are more sort of, sounds quite terrible, but they're more sort of exploitable. You know what I mean? Whereas, so I didn't really expect that, but I mean, it does make sense, right? Like if they're, oh, I shouldn't swear, but if they're bad for one side, they're bad for the other side, right? So yeah, it does make sense to me. So it was more. So obviously you're competing on price, but you're also competing on like quality of service for everyone. That's
Customer
really
service
interesting.
was a huge part of the student side as well, because I mean, just by being nice to a student in an email, like saying, have a great day, they'd be like, oh my God, you guys are actually replied to us and you're nice to us. And it was so easy to stand out because everyone else is either you're talking to a chatbot that you just can't communicate with, or you just, no one replies to you. Like, it's so
Yeah,
easy to be like a decent human in this market.
these letting agents have really set the bar like crazy low, haven't they? But I mean, it's not your fault, is it? You're kind of just like coming in and facing the incumbents in the market, right? So it's like not your fault at all. But it poses a really cool opportunity. So I guess like, so you made those sort of that, you made that Squarespace website, you started advertising it to Facebook groups on like for students. Um, how many kind of like landlords did you get on board before you started going to those Facebook groups? Or how many properties? That's
Um,
probably a better question.
I mean, it really just, I can't really say. It really just grew at the same time. Like the more students we got on board and they would come to us and ask us, oh, we need help finding this. We would then just go and find those properties to match them up. So it was growing at a relatively the same speed. And
Okay.
then, I mean, our whole business model though is focusing more on the student side, because as I said, it's all about building the platform for the students, unlike what's already out there. And by doing so, that helps the landlord. So just trying to prioritize the student side, but also being fair. Like if you have to mediate a lot and put out fires a lot in this job. So if a student has kind of messed around, then it's about being clear about what their obligations are and what they need to do to not get into any further trouble.
That's really interesting. So I guess like let's talk about quickly sort of the raising money side.
Yeah.
So how long before you started deciding, I guess, at what point, like how many sort of users did you have? Like what was the sort of like growth looking like before you decided to go towards the funding route?
So I think that things would have been different had we not launched in COVID. I think COVID made me very want to build a really robust business plan and kind of take no risks. So I was completely bootstrapped until about 2 months ago. I bootstrapped through our sales, generating revenue through our sales, and also through winning entrepreneurial competitions. So I found that a really good way in applying to all of these different grants and schemes out there. So just it can be quite lonely starting a business, and it's quite nice to pitch your idea, hear feedback, and kind of see ways to carry on improving the business, and just to kind of talk to someone else, do something a bit different. So we got funding from the new enterprise competition, a Bristol University of Bristol competition, funding from the Prince's Trust, funding from Montegumi 100 Awards, which was like finding a young entrepreneurs disrupting real estate. We participated in the kind of NatWest Pitch of a Lifetime, Bristol Property Awards, and then several different kind of competitions, just sort of talking about like companies that are doing disruptive things. And I think it's a really good
Mm,
opportunity to get press and also to get funding
mm.
without
So
giving
like
assets away.
yeah, exactly right. Like so out of all those competitions, how much like grant money, just to give an idea, like how much money there is out there to win. How much did you raise from that grant from those grant funding opportunities?
Around 25K altogether.
Mm.
Maybe
That's
20K.
pretty big. Like that's a lot of money to kind of test new ideas and stuff like that. It is really valuable. Um, we haven't actually won any grant funding yet. I guess we're quite young still, but yeah, it is really like those sort of like
You do need
funds.
time. Yeah, you
Yeah,
do need like
exactly.
the
They
time
take a
to
lot of time to get back to
dedicate
you,
it.
but
Yeah,
there's like a lot of them out there, So it is really sort of
definitely.
it is amazing. So I guess like you raised that sort of money, so it allowed you to remain bootstrapped, allowed you to kind of keep as much equity as possible. At what stage did you decide to go through the sort of like angel investing route?
So I think it comes to a point where you just need to grow the team because everyone's quite overworked in your kind of core founding team. And also just really wanting to spend some money on marketing because we're still very much just do guerrilla marketing techniques, and we still spend relatively nothing on marketing. So when I got to that point of just wanting to bring more experienced people on in terms of marketing and sales, um, that's the point where I decided to raise. So we're currently raising around £300,000 at the moment, to kind of close before February, and also to help us expand into these new cities. So we've just entered 7 new cities, so we're in 8 in total.
That's really cool. So, but you raised some money before as well, didn't you?
Yeah, raised 100. Well, 300K is including the 100K we've already raised
Okay.
from two angel investors.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I know there's like a lot of sort of conversations around like how do you raise money, how difficult is it to raise money, all of this stuff. Um, I guess like how did you do it? Was it easy? Like what was the sort of process that you used? I know we talked about this a bit over the phone a few weeks ago, but like what was the process?
I think it really helps. One, the competitions and any press. That's kind of how we've managed to find angel investors, people interested in the business, that you can first just use as a soundboard and then use them or their network to find other people who may be looking to invest in your industry. And yeah, it just kind of gives you a good platform to kind of be able to kind of tell the world what you're doing.
Mm.
So yeah, PR opportunities and these competitions really help you lead to talking, finding the right people that can join your kind of board and invest in your business.
So were those investors, those two angel investors that you mentioned, were they from? Do they know of you from those sort of competitions?
One of them, yes, and one of them was kind of through family and friends network, which is the number one network you need to tap into. You might have a
Mm.
cousin's friend's girlfriend's dog walker that has a lot of money, and it's always good to yeah, tease out any connections you can.
Okay, amazing. So let's talk about. You mentioned it a bit before, but the sort of guerrilla marketing tactics to use, because obviously, so my business, we're bootstrapped at the moment. I know a lot of the people listening, they have businesses or they're thinking about, starting a business, and they will be bootstrapped at the beginning, or they are bootstrapped right now. So I guess like, what, which techniques did you use? I mean, you already talked about some of them. Yeah, I guess like which techniques did you use?
So ambassador program was a really important one. Students feel very passionate about what we're doing, which is amazing, and have really wanted to get involved in the brand. So having ambassadors in each city that we operate in who can really help shape the direction of the business. We hold lots of focus groups, and we also pay them, so it's good, pocket money, and also help them build out their CVs to get employment after university. So it really fits into kind of our mission of helping students. So the ambassador program has been amazing. Also, just positive word of mouth reinforcement, people telling their friends and helping us fill properties that way. Um, Social media campaigns in terms of we're not amazing at this, but we could be doing better. But using Instagram, posting funny, unique content, and people really want to be involved in the business's journey, and founders talking about what they're doing, etc. So using social media can be such a great tool. And then partnering up with universities, some of the smaller colleges around the university don't have a rental advisor as such. They don't have their own kind of student union netting. So we've partnered up with them, partnering up with student loved brands as well. And there are a lot of
Mm,
platforms out there. I think that at first glance, you're like, wow, we're definitely competitors. We shouldn't talk. And then after a while, you think, there's actually a way we can work together and both win through a partnership. I hate
mm.
using the overused word synergy, but it is like the best word to describe that.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I think was obviously it's really interesting because you use these sort of techniques and you grew fairly quickly using them without spending much money. And I think like that's the sort of techniques that I think this podcast is very much about, is trying to like make things, create progress, create growth without much money. And I think like obviously I started this podcast for only like £50 and it's like where it is right now. So I love those sort of stories where the
Mhm.
growth is like you don't have to have a lot of money, you just have to have like a lot of drive and passion to be able to ignite that growth. So but I guess it's especially harder for you because, or it could be easier, I guess you could argue, is that because you're obviously that two-sided market. So when you're using these like marketing tools, like marketing strategies, you have to very much like obviously you have to focus on like like at the beginning, but then once that kind of grows on one side, then the other side will also grow because that value, like they're bringing the value. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, so I guess like did you encounter any problems or like because it was a two-sided platform specifically, or did you not really think about it?
Um, I mean, there was always that question to begin with of like, which side do we focus on? And I think it just became clear over time that we wanted to focus more on the student side. Of course, that means what we view it as, we need to build the supply on our platform and have amazing relationships with our landlords to offer our students the best selection of properties on the market and make sure that we always have a way of helping a student if they need last minute accommodation or there's been a dropout or anything goes wrong. So I think it's about in a two-sided marketplace, just knowing who you want to prioritize.
Mm.
But of course, you need to get a balance in the two to make it work.
Yeah, no, that's great. So let's talk about, I think, yeah, you mentioned obviously Facebook, which is really good for the demand side. So obviously Facebook's a massive platform. There's a lot of different things on there. So how did you kind of use it to get sort of interest within from HYBR?
Went through and found active Facebook groups with like freshers groups, rental groups, groups where people ask questions. Tried to start our own Facebook groups and just posted. That kind of just became known as the person who has accommodation and you can go to for questions. And then kind of
Mm,
just people were then referring my number around to other people to go to ask for advice. But yeah, just kind of posting as much as possible.
mm. Well, and telling them about like the benefits of coming onto the platform and all this stuff.
Not even. I think hard selling really loses people just by saying, what do you want? And then here's a property that matches that description.
Oh, that's really
I would literally
interesting.
do
So
the
that's
work for them.
so you enter these Facebook groups with all these students and you say like, what sort of properties would you guys look for? Or what sort of properties do you want?
Exactly.
That's really interesting. And then some of them will say like, we want this, and you basically just post it below them. That's a really interesting way because I think the default that a lot of people think is just to go straight in with the sales.
Yeah.
But you're right, it loses people. And I think like what we encountered, even from the B2B side, selling our cars to businesses, is that we were at first we went in with kind of like trying to sell like straight away when we connected on LinkedIn. Wrong tactic, really wrong tactic.
Mm,
We didn't get any sort of, the connection rate was quite high because like people would add me on LinkedIn, but then from the message, not many people replied. So
no.
we tried like different angles, like trying to like, make it more personalized, telling them just telling them about the business, just like as the introductory connection thing. And the replies really escalated from there. So I think you're completely right. You shouldn't go in straight away with that sales tactic. But I guess for you, you didn't even go in with the sales at all. You kind of just like put the property, and they were happy with that.
Yeah, no, but exactly what you said. Like, yeah, people are much more interested in something that's either personalized,
Mm,
catered for them, or it's just like a really interesting story.
mm. Yeah, for sure. And you still use cold calling as well from the supply side,
Yeah,
even like to this day.
yeah,
That's really interesting. So it must be like really effective for you guys because obviously you guys have the money now to be able to scale it out a bit more, but cold calling is still really effective.
yeah. I mean, we're trying to trial a few more strategies, but our number one go-to is still cold calling because you just can close the most deals in the shortest amount of time, and such a low cost.
Mm. See, that's one that I think a lot of young people have a lot of difficulties with. Is just like picking up the
Yeah.
phone and just
It's
calling.
it's really hard. Like I used to literally sit on my phone, just be like, "You have to do it. You have to do 5 a day," and I just wouldn't be able to. Just the fear of rejection, you feel so annoying. But then again,
Yeah.
like we said with the LinkedIn messages, if you find a way to make it just super useful, so that you actually feel like, "Hey, I'm actually calling you up to help you to make your life easier," then that's a much better way of approaching it rather than just feeling like you're nagging people with a hard sale.
Mm. So how did you get the number in the first place?
Going through competitor websites and
Mm.
looking at like, oh, you've still got a property available here. I've actually got a really lovely group of, 4 engineering students who are looking to rent in that area.
That's really interesting. So, would they ever like be like, "Oh, how'd you get my number? Like, what do you want?" and all this stuff? Oh, I guess their phone numbers are already up there, though, aren't they?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
normally quite, or it'd be like, oh, one of our ambassadors got it through their network, or one of your students said that you were an
Mm.
amazing landlord.
That's really interesting. But I swear, like for the landlords, their personal numbers aren't on these websites. It's more sort of it's just the agencies that it's their numbers, isn't it? Or are there websites where you can go directly to the landlord?
Exactly. There are both options, but there are a lot of people who just put their own phone number up.
That's really interesting. So, I guess cold calling for anyone listening is still very effective. If you are going down the route of any sort of businesses or anything like that, it is very sort of interesting. But I think you did the same strategy for cold calling that you did with the Facebook groups. You already had sort of a group ready. What's interesting as well is that you basically were doing what the service that HYBR was doing online, but you were kind of doing it, you were facilitating it all manually. So you
Yeah,
were kind of like you already had that group ready from I guess the Facebook groups, and then you were cold calling like different places that would match them and saying like we've already had we have someone like ready to do that, and then kind of matching them together. And I think that's such an amazing way to kind of test it and then gain that sort of landlord or that the student for like the lifetime.
yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing that strategy's like worked really well for you.
It's so what so many of these books and podcasts say. It's like do things that don't scale to begin with. Like
Hmm.
that doesn't scale, but it helps you realize what works, what doesn't work, what people really want, and then you can automate that at a later date.
For sure. I mean, the first product for Wing, we didn't have a website, we didn't have any software. I gave people a Google form. They filled out what links they want, and I just made it them myself and sent it out to them. So yeah, now we've got some
Exactly the
software.
same.
Yeah. Anyway, Hannah, I think we're gonna have to wrap up there. It was so amazing chatting to you. A lot of great advice. Like, I guess what is the future for Hyber?
We've got so many exciting things in store. I think what you see right now from HYBR is gonna look. I mean, the kind of mission and what we stand for is going to stay the same, but we're completely changing the platform in terms of like the map, what features that you can get as a student, wanting to offer an end-to-end solution, and so much more kind of information and bite-sized packets, so that you feel like you've got all the legal support and guidance that you need throughout your tenancy. And yeah, if
Mm.
anyone listening to this has any ideas or any problems that they've encountered while renting, we always encourage people to get in touch, because that really helps us shape the future of the product.
For sure. How can people find you?
You can find us on Instagram at hybr.uk. Our website is hybr.co.uk. You can fill out a contact us form, or you can contact me on LinkedIn or my email, hannah@hybr.co.uk.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Hannah, again, and I'm sure we'll chat
Thank
soon. Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.